Telling Tales has objects by people who trained as industrial designers, generally speaking, or product designers, rather than as fine artists. But here we see them using their design training to create pieces which are really more symbolic than they are functional, often, or which are very decorative. They're not prototypes for mass production, but they're more like personal statements. Since the 1990s, there's been a strong interest in the sort of conceptual value of design, and designers have learned to act very independently and to think very independently and to make personal manifesto statement pieces, rather like artists may make their own personal works. I particularly chose works for this exhibition which seem to have some kind of narrative content or references to history, or in this particular room where we're standing, references to fairy stories or more kind of general universal stories. Why do designers go back to this kind of content? Well, I think that they realise that design works are able to carry an awful lot of meaning, and that they can communicate very well as design objects, because we read them as the functionality of it. We understand it in some kind of fundamental way, and people can be touched by the content of these sort of universal truths, I suppose.
When we started off, we just thought that we didn't want to be in line of all the producers hoping that we could produce an industrial product for them, you know. And we tried to, the only thing we wanted to be is to be, you know, as free as possible in a creative way. So not linked and not limited to production processes and not to the market, not to clients, not to commercial aspects. Just only to be dependent on your own mind, to be the curator of your own mind. Nick and I thought that it would be kind of funny to imagine ourselves in, let's say, an office of a very bad person. You know, a person who makes the money over the backs of the poor. I think that's kind of satirical, yes. But also that doesn't mean that satirical can't be beautiful. I think they also have a sculptural quality which is very important to our work.
For me, it's using certain sort of techniques or using certain sort of craft is a way of getting across, as you said, a story, and kind of having people look at objects in a new way. And you know, for me, because I've always been sort of inspired by these specific objects, it's about looking at their story and sometimes creating stories about them and then telling those stories to other people. I found this old fox, and its ears were already very broken and sort of disintegrating. And it was sort of the damage that it had already sustained through its life as an object that inspired me to sort of create the idea of the golden maggot, which is, you know, for me it's a lot about the process of, you know, life and death, and not looking at maggots as a sort of disgusting creature, which is how they're usually viewed, and by sort of recreating them in golds, it gives them sort of a new life and a new way of looking at them.
We work in this context of design, industrial design, which has kind of been hijacked by a minimalist agenda, which stylistically is very strong, but in terms of content, it's very meaningless. And I think, just like myself, there's other people who kind of felt there's something missing in that. We want these things to much more relate to our life, how we see the world, and really become expressions of our own mood. Around here, 2000, 2001, I became very interested in the whole idea of decoration. I realized that this was something that, as designers going through industrial design art school, decoration is something we automatically thought not to do. And I kind of started to realize, well, why not? And there's something very interesting there. I started to look at pre-industrial revolution design and much more handmade crafts products. And I actually spent a lot of time here in the Victoria and Albert Museum, going through the embroidery collection, looking at the metal work, the wood carving. And I really realized that there's something, that sensuality that we've really lost in this very bland world that we live in. I want to create something very much richer, also more narrative and storytelling in that sense.
Well, there is a term that's been around for a few years now, describing this kind of work as design art. I think that it's a very contentious term and not really a term that I particularly like because it's very loaded. But I think there is definitely what we have here is a group of designers who appear to be acting rather like artists, and certainly with a similar kind of ambition as contemporary artists. But I really do think these are works of design first and foremost.
I think that this type of work has really hit the forefront now, possibly because people are interested in having objects that are more interesting than just everyday design pieces. They want things that are, you know, artistic and more conceptual, but still are things that they can live with and experience on a day-to-day life.
This whole notion about design art, for me, it does not exist. I am a product designer, I'm trained to be a product designer, and that's what I do. And I don't believe that I'm an artist. I still have like other ideas about an artist who is digging, asking questions to the world, like I would almost say like an elementary scientist.
The notion of design art seems very irrelevant to me. I myself see these pieces which are much on the high price class end of what I do in my studio, much more as experiments that will lead to production ideas. And I think it's actually quite dangerous to start take this design art market as something completely serious.
So in the end, it will always be a selective, era, and that's a good thing, I think, because you don't need this all over the world. Can you imagine that all the designers in the world would start now to make unique pieces and to make these kind of expressive pieces? Tomorrow you wouldn't even be able to go on the cap anymore.
I think underlying all of the content in the exhibition is a certain ambiguity and a feeling of uncertainty. So even when we're in the forest glade in this kind of childlike innocence, that's still undercut by a sense of threat or double meaning. So it's shifting sands, isn't it? I think that there is a sense of uncertainty, and perhaps that's what the designers in the exhibition are telling us about our own times, that we're in shifting times and there are no certainties any longer.